Michelle Ramos. Before you wrote the Unwanted and the series, did you already have it all planned or any ideas for the series?
That's a great question, Michelle. I wrote the first book, and by the time I was almost finished writing book one, I realized there was so much more in this world that I could do. But I hadn't talked to my editor about it or anything yet. They wanted to see if the first book would actually sell, like if people would like it, before they said, okay, you can do a whole series. So I wrote the first book, and I kind of ended it in a way that had things, I left it open so I could add stuff later, but I had to really close the book in case it was just going to be a standalone. But by the time things were moving along and the book was selling pretty well, they said, yes, let's do some more. Then I sat down and wrote down exactly what I thought was going to happen. And I thought it was going to be 5 books. And then as I got to writing through book 2 and the beginning of book 3, I realized that 5 wasn't enough, that I needed 7, probably 6 or 7. And so eventually it became 7, and I just had to spread things out a little bit. So, but yeah, I knew pretty early on exactly how everything was going to end, and that it would, all the major plot points along the way.
My name is Sienna, and my question is, how did you come up with the magical creatures of Arteme?
The magical creatures of Arteme. Do you have a specific one you're thinking of? Because I came up with different ones in different ways.
I like Octavia.
Like Ms. Octavia. Okay, so Octavia is an octopus alligator, but she's not those actual animals melded together. She was created, Mr. Today made her out of seaweed and stuff like that from the ocean. And I knew I wanted, I loved the fact that she had the 8 arms. I thought that would be really helpful for someone who is an artist and, needs to do all kinds of different things with drawing and painting and chalk and could hold all of those things at once. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. But I didn't want her to be just an octopus, and I thought, well, she needs to be a little bit frightening too. And actually having the alligator head gave her sort of this fierceness with the softer sort of octopus legs and body that she has. And I don't know how that I actually came up with that, but I knew I needed somebody who would be good in the water, like a sea person, for down the road. So that's how I got that one.
Would you ever consider putting the book series into movies?
Mm-hmm. And what was your name again?
My name's Madison.
Madison. Yes, I would do it. I don't know how to make movies though, so basically authors kind of, we sit around the phone every day and we wait with our sunglasses on and we wait for Hollywood to call. And we're like, some super director is going to call me anytime and say, I just read your book, The Unwanted. I want to make a movie. Can we do it? And I'd be like, yes, you can. I'd want to hear what ideas they have, but basically how that works is it's not exactly like that. Obviously, I have an agent and it would go through him, but since I just write books. Like I don't even know how to write a script for a movie. And it's really difficult to transfer a book into a script that would show really well on the big screen. So that's what all the people who work in Hollywood do. They have all kinds of jobs like that, screenwriters, and they have directors and producers who all try to work together, and then they have the big studio, which you might recognize, like Sony, Paramount, Focus Films, different studios like that. And so they have to time it all with everybody, work it all right. They have to get somebody to write a script and approve of it, and then find actors, and they do all of that. They don't let the authors usually do a whole lot with that sort of thing. Although it depends who you are. I mean, if you're J.K. Rowling, then yes, you can get to say things that happen in your movies. I think she started really working on the movies, on her Harry Potter movies, with the 3rd one, I'm not positive on that, but she became quite involved, and Stephanie Meyer did too, with her after the first ones. So I hope to be involved, but usually they don't let you, so I don't have my hopes up. but hopefully someday.
I'm Victoria, and how would you describe your experience writing Unwanted?
My experience writing The Unwanteds, awesome. I mean, it's like I've written a lot of books. My 14th book just came out, and it was book 5 of The Unwanteds. But I have like 6 or 7 teen books, and 8, I think, actually. And I love writing both kinds. The teen books are paranormal, and The Unwanteds is fantasy and dystopian, 2 worlds. But the Unwanteds is like the series that's just super special to my heart. And I think it might be because of my kids, because they were really involved. In fact, they inspired the idea. I'm not sure if that's one of anybody's questions, like what inspired the story of The Unwanteds, but I'll go ahead and tell you if you don't mind. One day my kids came home from school when they were 12 and 9, and they had a letter from the school, and it said, "Dear parents, we are very sorry to tell you that we have to eliminate the arts classes in our school because of budget problems." So they took away art and music and theater, and I knew my kids would be really sad about that. My son loves to draw, my daughter loves theater and to sing, and I remember saying to my kids, "I am so sorry, kids. It kind of feels like you're being punished for being creative." And then I thought, wait a second, what if there really was a world where children were punished for being creative? And I said it out loud, and my 12-year-old son said, "Not just punished, sent to their deaths." And I said, yes. And that's how the whole first chapter came about. I started writing that first chapter right away. And so I don't know if that actually answers the question, but I love writing The Unwanteds. It's been a great experience, and I feel like I could write in that world more and more.
Hi, my name is Zachary, and I was curious of who or what influenced you to create the Island of Fire and Island of Legends.
Great question. So, Island of Fire is a volcanic island, and it disappears underwater. And I don't know how I don't know exactly how I figured out that it goes on, that it drops down underwater, but I wanted it to be special in some way and different, and not just a boring volcano island, And so somehow that came about. I think I might have had a dream about it, and I get a lot of ideas from dreams. And then they have their world is actually underwater. It's like they live in the aquarium, and the fish are on the outside of it, So, and then book 4, Island of Legends. Again, I wanted to find an island that would be very different from the other ones that we'd visited so far, just so that for readers it would be easy for you to picture. They're all quite different from each other. And I got to thinking about I think I first thought that the island would just move on its own, and then I thought, what if it's alive? What if it's an animal? What if it's a giant legendary creature? And that's how that whole Island of Legends came about. And then I populated that island with other legendary kind of creatures too. And that's actually been one of my favorite islands so far. But we've got more to come. 2 more books after the 5th one here. So,
if you could have any creature from the Unwanted as a pet, which would you use or have and why?
Oh, wow. Any creature as a pet. That's a great question. No one has ever asked me that before, which is pretty amazing. Boy, I think I'd have a squirrelicorn. I think they're pretty cool. They can fly. They've got a big old horn. They can stab people. I mean, they'd be a good protector, but yet a friend, And they can fly, which is great. So I'd go with that.
Ezra Anderson, and what inspired you to have characters possess certain symbols, such as Alex in his cape or Mr. Janae and his robes?
Are those symbols? Is that what your English teacher says? Mm-hmm. That they're symbols?
That says it.
Gotcha. Wow. This question is a really hard question for me, because I think I don't think about, when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about symbols and being symbolic in any way. And what was the first part of your question? Like what inspired me to use those kinds of things? I don't know. Part of me thinks capes can be very dangerous, right? Like in The Incredibles, you never know. No capes, right? We have a rule. But it sets somebody apart, actually. It makes them look different. Their appearance is different. So, and especially when I'm working with identical twin brothers, I like to have an opportunity to make them, different, so that other people in the community there in Arteme and in Quill, so that they can tell them apart. But then also, I don't always like them to wear it because I do want, as you know, there's a lot of imitating the other going on in the story. So, yeah, that was a good question.
In The Unwanted, how did you create the idea of magic?
In The Unwanted, okay, so I wrote that first chapter. And the first chapter, if you remember, goes along with everybody's lined up in the, for the purge. The two brothers are standing there. Alex gets chained to all the other Unwanteds, put on the bus. They take him to the death farm, and then they meet the Eliminators. The enormous guys with the red beady eyes and stuff, and they think they're gonna die. And I finished writing this part of it, and I kept thinking, something has to happen soon, or it's going to be a really short book, right? Because they get sent to their death, then they all die, and that's the end, right? Because there's no more characters. So I didn't want that to happen. And I kept trying to think exactly what I wanted to do in order to have them stay alive. And I knew I wanted them to live secretly. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if the creativity that they all have could be used in some really special way? And I got to thinking about one of my favorite books as a child, which was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I loved that magical world. And I thought, I think I'm going to try magic. And I'd never written magic before. And so I asked my kids to help me with that too. I said, what kind of magic could these kids do using their creative abilities, and maybe by using art supplies? And so my daughter came up with the invisibility paintbrush. She said, what if you could just paint yourself invisible? And I'm like, cool, I like it. And then my son Killian said, well, what if you picked up a handful of paper clips and threw them at your enemy, and they went soaring out and stabbed through their clothing and stuck them to the wall? And I was like, that's a great idea, I love it. So we worked with that, and I came up with the fire-breathing origami dragons, and it just became a family thing. We all talked about it, and in fact, my son, who was 12 when I started writing the book, by the time he was 17, the first book was about to come out. It took me a while to write that first book because I was writing other books at the same time. And he started doing drawings for me, which you guys can find on the unwantedseries.com, and you can download some of the drawings he's done of different characters and different scenes. And he also is one of my first readers, but he's 21 now, and he's in school for art. And so you can see the progression of how much better he gets by the more schooling he's had. But anyway, those magical things really came from Narnia and from just a conversation with the family.
Why did you pick twins for the main characters and not any other siblings?
I wanted them to be identical so that they could be confused for each other. So that's why I did identical twins. That's just about the only reason why. So, but there's also a twin theme that sort of runs through. If you've read through the first book, you know of another set of twins, and then if you've gotten to book 2, you know about Matilda and Charlie, who are almost identical as well. They're the gargoyles who have the telepathic ability. They can talk to each other from any distance, and so there's sort of that kind of theme going throughout the books.
As an author, how do you determine which characters to put in relationships?
Oh, great question. Putting characters in relationships is so fun. I mean, it's really fun. I like to do that, and I don't always know what's exactly is going to happen with the romantic relationships. But I don't think that, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but Lonnie and Alex sort of have a little interest in each other. But because of what happens in book 2 to Lonnie and Samid, the two of them become very close, because they're forced to. And that gives them a bond that they didn't have before and that Lonnie doesn't have with Alex. So that's kind of, it's just fun. I don't know, I feel like...
And Sky with Alex?
Yeah. The same thing, really. Sky was there for Alex when he was in his darkest moments, when they're sitting on the roof of the gray shack and Alex can't figure out how to restore everything, and everybody's leaving and getting mad, and there's not enough food or water. Sky's the one who's there with him and stays by his side, and that gives them a bond as well. And they really understand each other, and I think they're more suited for each other, although I do have a lot of fans who are mad that Alex and Lonnie broke up. Are any of you guys, you're okay with it, or?
I'm okay with that as long as, because Sky and Alex seem to like a lot better than Lonnie and Sandy. I think they're really good.
Yeah, they are so opposite too, right? Lonnie and Sammy, and in fact they didn't like each other at first, but they sort of learned to, and that became a really strong thing in their relationship.
If you wanted to change any of your characters' names, what would you change them to?
Oh, I can't imagine changing them, because once I have it in my head and I've written it, and then I keep revising my books, for a while, and then by the time it's finally out in the public and people know the characters' names, I've had them named that for a year and a half. It'd be sort of like changing my own children's names, which I don't think I could do,
What made you create the characters of Ashibashi and Asho-san in book 5?
Yes, in book 5, so Ishibashi and Ito and Sato are the 3 scientists who live there. And nobody's ever asked me that question either. You guys have great questions. So I did this is a tough question to answer because I don't want to spoil anything that you're going to find out soon in book 6. So I have to be real careful, but there's definitely a reason, and I don't know if you remember, here's a clue. In book 5, Alex and Ms. Octavia go down and explore the ship that Ishibashi and Ito and Sato came on that's sunk to the bottom, and it's named something, except there's some missing letters. So if you can figure out the missing letters and then Google it, you might have your answer. There, fun.
What caused the world of Quill to go all dystopian?
The world of Quill, it took a while, and basically it became a power struggle with Justine. She wanted more power, and the more she took away from the people, the more power she had. And slowly, it happened about over 50 years. So when something is changing, when a society is changing, it usually takes quite a long time if the people are to be accepting of it. I mean, there can be a fast change in a society where the people want to revolt or something, but it takes a real art to convince your people that sending their children that are less than the other children to their deaths is okay. So that is just, it happened very slowly with Justine from the beginning.
My question is sort of like what Madison had, and it's like, what will Aaron be in a relationship in one of your next books? Like how Alex sort of wanted this relationship with Megan or Lonnie?
That's a great question. At this point, I believe that Aaron has never imagined himself in that way, in that capacity at all. If that changes, that could change, it could not. But
He kind of thought Sky was like perfect when he saw her though.
he did. He had a glimpse of her, and really, I don't think he ever surrounds himself in Quill with anybody his own age or anything like that. So it has never been on his mind at all until I think when he came to Artemis that one time. Yeah. And what was that, end of book 3?
Yeah.
How did you think of the setting in the Unwanted?
The setting of Artemis, you mean? I wanted a desert-like world, partly because I had just moved to Arizona from Michigan. And I was writing that first book in the summer, and I was new here, and I live in Mesa. So it was so hot, and I was trying to get used to this, and just describing the desert sort of was my way of acclimating to living in this new place. That's why Quill is such a deserty kind of world with, hardly ever rains there, and everything's dusty and dry, and so that was sort of how I came up with the Quill side of things. And then the Artemis side of the island is a much smaller piece, but it's got the lake, or the water, the sea, and that was inspired by a place where my mother grew up. Her father and her mother and father had a house near Lake Michigan, and it was on this huge property. It was just a small plot, like next to this huge property that was right on the lake, and it used to be a zoo back in the 1920s, and it had like fountains, and it had elephants, and it had all kinds of cool animals and stuff. When she lived there, those were all gone, but I learned about that zoo in some research I was doing for a different project, and I thought, what a neat little setting this is. It's got all this shoreline, it's got just this fountain that is right in the middle of everything, and this mansion here where the man who owns the zoo lived, and I just thought it was the perfect setup for Artemis.
What helped you think of the other islands outside of Quill and Artemis?
Oh, let's see. The other islands outside of Quill and Artemis, I wanted them to be very... I knew that there had been some exploration in that Mr. Today and Justine had not always lived on Quill, that they came from somewhere else. So that was the beginning of coming up with an idea and of different islands. And, I wanted a few different places, but not a lot. So I guess as I was writing, I started thinking about what the next islands would be. What would be their story? So each island has its own story, right? But yeah, that was just a sort of a slow process as I was writing.
Why haven't you kept it a mystery on what exactly happened to Mr. Today's wife?
How far have you read?
I finished the 3rd book, and I know she got sent to the ancient.
Yes, okay. There's not much of a story on her. Basically, I think it's in one of the books, and I can't remember which one, and it might be not till later, that Mr. Today chose to help Justine and go to the death farm to handle all of the unwanted children, and his wife chose not to go with him. She didn't want to live that life.
Did you have a say on each cover, and if so, did you want to have Simba on all of them?
I had what they call cover consultation rights, which is in my contract and everything, which basically says they show me the cover, they let me give some feedback, but they'll still do whatever they want. But luckily I loved the covers, and we started off with Simba on the first cover, and it was such a hit. People loved seeing Simba flying at them, and we thought, well, let's keep Simba, because Simba is a key character, especially in the early books, and love having him just because he's different, I think instead of just having kids on the cover, you get to see, oh, there's something else in this story that's different from, it implies there's fantasy here. So I think it helps the readers too realize, oh, this is a fantasy book because there's this thing flying here that doesn't exist in my world. So so I don't know if he'll be on all the covers, but most of them.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you so much
you.
for having me
Thank you.
and for thinking of such great questions. It's so nice to have different questions to answer like that. All of you had great ones. So thanks for having me.